Well, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Harry Brailsford. I'm not Jenny Hallmark. I'm going to fix that right now. Jenny, that's kind of funny that they think I'm you and maybe you're me. So let's fix that. Folks, we're trying out a new approach, and that is to work more with video as part of the MSP Tech Talk to, quite frankly, add more value. So first, let me change my name, and we'll see if that takes it. It does. Okay, we're back. So midday in Seattle, mid-afternoon on the East Coast, evening in Europe, very early morning in Asia. Thank you for joining the Summer MSP Tech Talk series. A little bit of housekeeping, as we always like to do. I'm going to be at ChannelCon in Boston. I believe that's September 6th. Then about 10 days later, I'm going to hit GlueCon and SolarWinds over in Phoenix. And those are the most immediate events that I'll be at. I'm happy to have you shake my hand, have a cup of coffee, let's talk industry. I know Josh Lieberman, who I'll introduce in a moment, he goes to many of the same shows, so we're all community. With that said, today's an exciting conversation. It's the ever-popular security conversation, and Joshua Lieberman is from the community. He's one of us. He carries the bag, but he's also strategic, and most recently starting to do some writing to supplement his event photography, and he's a speaker. So with that said, Joshua Lieberman, please introduce yourself a little better than I did. You live in a part of the world where 4 states intersect, right? The 4 corners. Tell us about, for people that don't know you, tell us about yourself.
All right. Well, thanks, Harry. And I'll introduce myself as Joshua Lieberman. No offense, it's Lieberman. And
Lieberman, okay.
It's all right. So yes, it is the 4 quarters, which are roughly 280 miles to the northwest of here. I'm in Albuquerque, more or less the center of the state geographically and economically, as it were. We're a town of about 2/3 of a million. Surrounding area brings us up to about 1 million, which makes us about half of our state. So it's a small and lightly, well, it's a large but lightly populated state in the Southwest time. I've been in the industry 28 years, running Sciences 23, and truly focused on IT security probably for about 15. And IT security in the SMB standpoint. So we have to focus on doing the 80% of it for the 20% of cost. And that's really a lot about what we'll talk through today. By the way, Channel Pro, I think you mean up in Boston. I'll be speaking there as well on September 6th. And then I'll also be at IT Glue as a photographer, but at SolarWinds MSP's show that same week as an attendee.
Man, I'm going to see you everywhere. Hey, Joshua, before we get going, let me make sure we give a shout out to SolarWinds itself. It's because of the generous sponsorship of SolarWinds that we're on the air and we're able to bring true academic content. So shout out to SolarWinds, and also a shout out to Intermedia. I'm coming to you live from their Bellevue, Washington offices. So they accommodated my schedule, and I'm in a conference room. But Joshua, I know the people, let's get into the good stuff, man. We got a lot to cover in 90 minutes.
Okay, well, I'm good to go. This slide I think we've covered pretty well. I just want to focus on the bottom line here, which is something I learned in many years of martial arts, that there's nobody that's an expert and anybody can get beaten on any given day. And you have to keep in mind that there's simply no way you can do this perfectly. So let's dive in. And I've got a part 0. As in, let's start ground zero. The issue we deal with is overcoming apathy, or the "it can't happen to me" attitude of most SMBs, including folks we visited with ourselves yesterday and last week. So there's just so many different ways it can happen to them, and so little time and money to be spread across the problem. That's probably the biggest issue. And of course, cost is always a major factor of these folks, because they really don't see it as an investment. They see it simply as a cost. And as we said, they have that "it won't happen to me" attitude. So now we're at what do we do about that? And this is a very general way to address this question in large scale. And that is that we tell stories to folks. We try to build trust, because without trust, there's just no way you're going to move forward. with any of these efforts. So we lead with security with all of our offerings, whether we're acting as an MSP or not. We have a base package that has about 6 primary security components to it. Everything else builds on that and adds to it. And along those lines, it's always a bundled package. There's almost nothing. I believe we offer firewall log reading as a separate service, but almost everything else is bundled together. We don't really want people picking it apart and deciding what they need. We do offer add-ons in an a la carte fashion, but they're all built on bundled packages. So it's like going in to order your truck or your next Audi. You know, you're going to buy a package. You might add a better stereo to it, but you're starting with a package that includes everything else that they think you have to have. So the last thing I want to cover here is that we really sell security more as a reliability and profitability concern, because a network that's not secure is also not stable and is going to have problems. It's not to say that a perfectly secure network is possible, but we're trying to get there. So,
hey, and Joshua, if you don't mind, let me just interject one more housekeeping item. Folks, use the question feature on your control panel to ask your questions, and we're going to stop periodically for Joshua to answer your questions. Please continue.
Yeah, Harry, originally I was going to stop on fixed intervals, but I think a better idea is for you guys to monitor the questions and just alert me, and I'll keep an eye on the time. As long as we can, we'll answer as many questions as come up. How's that?
Okie dokie. All righty.
So the foundations of are really all about secure network design. And I want to make clear here that a lot of the times, as you know, we come in as MSPs or MSSPs to a situation that's already in place. And there are things we can't do. We're not going to rebuild a network, at least not from the ground up and not day one. So take with a grain of salt some of these suggestions, because some of these things you simply can't do when you walk in the door after the fact. So we always VLAN, or we always attempt to VLAN our networks out into at least production voice and Wi-Fi networks. And when we can, we break out a separate management VLAN as well. Not just for security, sometimes it's a performance issue, although with gig and 10 gig, that's less of an issue than it used to be. But we walk in there and we try to build an appropriately VLAN solution for all those reasons and for security as well. We like to isolate hypervisors, switches, and firewalls, again, on a management VLAN if we can, and we like to restrict access and credentials to those things. We also look at physical security. Years and years ago, we had a site that called us constantly for their server was a mess every morning, and we went out there time and again. This is back in the Novell days. One day, as we were leaving the building at the end of the day, we noticed that their front office person flicked the light off, and the server, which was on a table in the entryway to the business, shut down abruptly. And it turns out that they had moved that server, put it on a light switch that was a light switch controlled outlet, and they were basically crashing their server as they went home each night. That was a testament to silliness, oversight, and the stability of the Novell operating system. Nonetheless, physical security matters. Pay attention to it. We'll address it later on.
Yeah, Josh, we'll get back to that. I have a question about cameras and that kind of thing, but we'll get back to that later. I'll hit you on the rebound on physical. Go ahead.
We actually do cover security cameras here. So another foundational consideration is secure OS design. And we want to harden the OS to the extent we can. Now, this can be done after the fact. It's best if it's planned in, but you can certainly reduce the attack surface by going in and finding services that aren't necessary and disabling them. It's a lot of work. You'll learn how to use tools that teach you about dependencies across services, and there's some trial and error, which is why I say doing it first before the network is in production is better. But you can definitely do some of this after the fact, and you will develop your own list of crucial services based on the roles that these servers play. In the SBS days, there was a lot more that had to happen or be running. Nowadays, especially if you have a dedicated DC, there's a lot of things that you can shut down. The next thing is we go into file system design, and of course, we're always going to work with a least permission concept, and we're going to build permissions out as need be. We try to harden this, slim it down as best we can, and build out those permissions as we need to. Finally, security through GPOs is a very broad topic and could easily do an hour on that. But again, back in the SBS days, one of the big things was WSUS GPOs to apply WSUS updates to machines. Nowadays, security GPOs cover the gamut between really restrictive things like locking out software installation to simple stuff like forcing logouts or restricting machines that users can log in from. More and more, as we start to develop a HIPAA practice, we've learned that this is an extremely powerful and useful tool. I'm sure lots of you guys out here and the women on this call have experienced the same thing. GPOs are just endlessly useful. They are tricky, and you can certainly paint yourself into a corner, so you have to be careful and document what you do, but they're very powerful. So, oops. Let's try that. Okay.
I was gonna say we're going backwards in time, my friend. Okay, go on.
Because I can't roll a mouse. There we go. So back to the foundations. What we refer to as the inner perimeter. Again, this is something you can do after the fact. From 2008 R2 or maybe 2012 on, Windows Server has had the DHCP servers had the ability to restrict the assignment of IPs to known MAC addresses. So you get your DHCP scope populated, you can go ahead and say, okay, no more new assignments. This is not exactly network access control, it's kind of the poor man's version, but it does prevent people from casually dropping devices on the network, picking up DHCP addresses, and you're not knowing about it. It's a nice thing to throw in there, and it's pretty powerful for 60 seconds worth of work and free. So login restrictions, which are generally enforced through GPOs, are another way, and I'm referring to a lot of different things here, restricting what machine users can log in from, restricting hours of the day or times of the week that users can log in, and various other things that apply to remote access. There's a lot of neat little tricks here. Every little bit helps, and anything that's free and easy to implement, your only risk is it'll cause a little bit of chatter and you'll have a little more work to do at your help desk until things settle in, but these are well worth doing. Here's a whole separate concept that really deserves its own slide at some point, but internal vulnerability scans are pretty much what they sound like. They're generally offered as a service or delivered by an appliance, and these go across the network, inside the network, I should say, and they scan for missing patches or other vulnerabilities. Some solutions will even look at things on the Active Directory level and let you know if you have, give you a list of people with domain admin or other admin rights that you didn't know were there. They'll look for unused but still active accounts that should be disabled or removed, and various other Active Directory time bombs waiting to happen. So now we're at the outer perimeter. So this is things like, for the most part, enforced by the firewall, things like geo-IP filtering and botnet filtering. Botnet filtering just is a common sense thing. If your firewall offers it, most do, turn it on. There's no reason in the world not to filter traffic from known botnets. As far as geo-IP filtering goes, on paper that looks like a great thing to enable, and most of us can go into our clients and say, you know, what 4 countries do you deal with, what 192 do you not? The problem is that there's lots of gotchas in geo-IP filtering. A lot of companies such as Akamai that do acceleration for web traffic have acceleration servers in countries that you wouldn't consider likely. Microsoft Office 365 itself is hosted in various countries. I find that almost anybody that disables traffic through Ireland, thinking that there's no reason to move traffic from Ireland, just forgotten about the favorable tax structure they offer. So Microsoft's there. Yeah.
Joshua?
Yeah.
I have a question from Jonathan Handler, who it's a fair question. He's asking, what are GPOs? Maybe if you could go over that.
Yeah, GPO stands for Group Policy Object, and it's a Windows Active Directory construct. If you guys aren't in the Windows world, then it doesn't apply. But a GPO in general terms is a rule that you can construct and apply to machines, users, or groups to limit or enforce any number of things. It's real complicated, but basically it is a way to limit or enforce access to or use of or maintenance or various limitations or parameters of the use of machines. It can be or resources on the network targeted at machines or users. So applied to a machine, it applies to everybody that logs into the machine. Applied to users, it applies to them wherever they log in from. That's a pretty mangled description, but it's a big topic.
And Jonathan says it is, and he says thank you. And folks, if you're interested in a double click on this, any book by Jeremy Moskowitz, we go back to we all started as writers back in the late 90s, and Jeremy Moskowitz is kind of the man, or was the man on GPOs. Please continue, Joshua.
Sure, I want to throw out the name Mark Manazzi too. His books very well cover GPOs. I've learned a lot from him over the years, and now he's retired. So let's move on to layer 7 traffic management. So layer 7 refers to the ISO stack, to the OSI stack of network, and it refers to the top layer, which is application layer. Many firewalls, especially faster and newer ones, will provide you the opportunity to restrict traffic that happens, or restrict data flow by traffic type. For example, at layer 7, you could block Facebook Messenger and various chats, but still allow other Facebook traffic. It's very, very granular control. It's a wonderful way to add a layer of protection against social engineering and other such attacks, including blended attacks that are triggered that way. It requires some time. You're not going to walk in there and do this in 10 minutes, and you're going to have to sit with your client and work through how they use how their data traffic is managed and what they really do in their business. But where we can get this done, it's a wonderful extra layer of protection. And I'm going to finish up briefly on DPI and DPI SSL and non-signature scanning. I say briefly, almost ironically, this is tough stuff. Non-signature based scanning is now offered by a lot of the firewall vendors. It's a heuristic analysis of traffic. What they do is they take that traffic, if it's unknown, if there's a file type or a file they haven't seen before, and it's of course not already flagged as bad in any of the signature databases, they will shunt that traffic to a cloud-based analysis center in real time, detonate that traffic, watch its behavior, designate it as malicious or benign, pass it through if it's benign, or target it, tag it as malicious, create a real-time applied antivirus or packet scanning signature to it so that it gets blocked and won't get through in the future. And of course, you're paying back the community by adding your efforts to that. The sonic wall way of doing this is known as capture. We have experienced it adding 5 or 10 seconds to open some files, or 5 or 10 minutes in the extreme. So it's not without a bit of footprint. Your users will notice it occasionally pop up the screen and indicate it's scanning traffic, but for the most part, it's very quick and it's very powerful. And for many people, it's the only non-signature based scanning that they do on their entire network at any level. DPI SSL, which is the scanning of SSL encrypted traffic at the deep packet inspection level, is a very big topic. I'm going to just touch upon it and explain that with about 2/3 or more of traffic on the web now encrypted, it's an extremely important feature. It's very processor and memory intensive in the firewall. If you think that you're going to place a $1,000 firewall on a 100 meg circuit with 100 users that does this, you're probably in error. It might be okay with a $1,500 firewall, but it's very intensive. Quickly described, DPI SSL is the ability to decrypt, scan, and re-encrypt traffic as it comes through the network. As such, essentially what you're doing is performing a benign man-in-the-middle attack because you're decrypting and re-encrypting that. If you know how this works, you'll understand that certificates that are issued from the issuer will no longer reach the end workstation. So if you went and you opened up a website, you won't see at the workstation the certificate from the issuer anymore. You'll see the certificate from the firewall, which was the source of the re-encryption of that traffic. Remember, the firewall decrypts it, scans it, re-encrypts it, delivers it. Kind of complicated. It means that you have to update the machines to make them aware of the fact that they can accept certificates from this firewall in lieu of the issuing site. That is the 10,000-foot view, very oversimplified. There's a lot to it. We can certainly talk about that later on or offline, but that's a very powerful feature. And again, most all the newest and fastest firewalls can do that. It's even built into the security set that's the base security feature set nowadays for SonicWall in particular. I'm leaning on SonicWall just because we worked with them for 19 years, we know, or 18 years, know them inside out. So the next step is a little more basic. It's about passwords. So we're stepping into a whole section that's going to be things that you can do after the fact. These are things that no matter what you pick up in terms of your on your network, you're going to be able to apply these things. All right, so I think I lost myself there on the video. There we go. So better passwords. We all know.
You know what?
Yeah?
If you don't mind, Joshua, I think we lost the screen share. Can you double check on the PowerPoint deck? Right now, it just went to vid.
Really? Okay.
Okay, we're back. We're back. Okay. Right on.
I'm not sure I did that, but okay. So it's fixed. In this second part, we're going to talk about things that you can do on your own, no matter what happens, no matter what the state of the network is that you pick up. So we're going to start with better passwords, which everybody knows we need, and hardly anybody does well. We'll start with complexity requirements, or the switch to passphrases, not passwords. We have some requirements. They're eight characters, a mix of at least 3 upper and lowercase, alpha and diacritical, or things like exclamation points and whatnot. We do require our sites to use 3 of those 4, and we take a lot of flack for it. We have moved to passphrases at some of our better sites. They are definitely better than passwords. They can be long. They don't have to be terribly complex. We can drop the complexity requirements, but they're simply harder to brute force crack. They're particularly nice if they don't contain usernames and other things that are immediately hackable. But the real bottom line here is that we try to move people towards password management solutions. In our case, I'll continue to mention the vendors we use. It's Passportal. We're very happy with their capabilities. We haven't extended it to the end users yet, but certainly that capability is out there. The bottom line is no matter what we tell our customers, unless we provide them a way to do this well, they're going to fall back on what they've been doing all along, which is how to do it simply. All right, so let's go on. Software patching and reporting. It almost goes without saying, and I say almost because I've been at 2 sites recently where this wasn't being done, but it almost goes without saying that you've got to do software patching and reporting. Microsoft and third-party software has to be patched in an automated fashion. There has to be reporting about it. You have to know it's happened, or more importantly, when it hasn't. And you have to know that very few of us run into the situation that I love hearing Microsoft tell us to try this out on the customer's test or experimental network. They don't have a network that's just for that. They have a network that's the production network. So for us, we read about these, we test them to the extent we can here, which is never the same as being out there. And then we put them in place and we hope for the best. So it's patch and pray. You can't.
Joshua,
yeah,
the slide deck just popped off, sir. If you don't mind me, just when that occurs, there we go. We're back.
Yeah, I did figure out what caused that. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I have a magic wand. Look, see, I'm waving a magic wand. Okay.
Okay, as long as you don't.
Please continue.
All right, so here we go. So I like to say that this goes without saying, but as we all know, this doesn't go without saying. We still see sites all the time. You simply have to patch. There's no workaround, and you have to know it works. You can't roll your own. You have to have a management solution for that. Most of us are RMM based, and of course that's for most RMMs built in, but it's not something you can overlook. So modern anti-malware. I'm going to go out on a limb and tell folks that signature-based anti-malware is almost dead. It might be a bit of a Monty Python cartoon. They're not quite dead yet, and I still use it for most of our sites. We're in a transition to non-signature or heuristic-based stuff from people out there. I'm sure you've heard of the Cylance, Sentinel-1/Carver / whoever just bought them, I forgot, and others, Black Carbon and other solutions. Having anti-malware at the endpoint that is not signature-based has become almost de rigueur. We're out there actively proselytizing this and moving our base to this, and I hope them all done by the end of the year. That's a behavioral-based software I'm referring to, again, from the vendors I mentioned, Cylance, Carbon Black, Sentinel-1. And the other half of this is you have to have reporting. You have to be able to be aware of when you have a problem at an endpoint. A lot of good, I use that word loosely, a lot of good malware is designed to disable the protection against it first. If you don't know that's happening, you're in the dark. And for a lot of sites that have regulatory issues, the ability to do reports and demonstrate that you've got effective endpoint security at any given time, and to run reports and demonstrate what's been caught or what's been stopped or maybe even what's gotten through is really vital. So that's part of the whole group as well. All right, now I'm going to jump all the way to DNS filtering solutions. Again, these are things you can do after the fact. It doesn't matter what they're doing now, you can fix it. So DNS filtering solutions are distinct from the content filtering that you
Hey, Joshua?
Yeah?
Hey, you know, before we shift gears, let me just catch up. Jonathan Handler was asking, back to the GPO discussion, is this an expansion of group policy rules? You'll need to help me on that. Is the GPO expanding group policy rules? Are they separate concepts?
Well,
are they varied?
GPOs are how you execute group policy rules.
Okay.
Rule is created by a group or refers to group policy objects. So it's all part of the same concept.
All right, and Warren Prush asked, he basically has a comment. He says, Microsoft patching is so prone to problems, especially in the 1803 Win 10 version. So Warren, what I would offer, appreciate the statement. That's not really a question. What I would offer is read Anything and Everything by Susan Bradley, longtime community member.
Yeah, and while I absolutely agree with him, and certainly we have shifted gears from, for a long time, we never went a week before we dropped patches out. We now probably spend 2 weeks reading and researching, occasionally testing, patching, and largely because of Windows 10. As we all know, that is a relative nightmare. It's probably the worst thing we have to manage in terms of patching. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with this statement. Unfortunately, it's the reality we find ourselves moving within. You have anything else?
One more. Yeah, one more question, then I'll go back on mute. Folks, I'm going to let questions queue up a little bit. So Daryl Roberts asked, what are you using for DNS filtering? Cisco Umbrella, since they bought OpenDNS, is expensive. What are you using?
We did actually migrate from Cisco Umbrella to DNS Filter, which is far less expensive, especially unless you have sites with millions of requests. The details of how the billings work are complicated. At first, DNS Filter did not have a client that you could throw on a portable machine to take it outside of your network and still protect it. Now they do. There are some other differences, and there are even solutions that are free as far as I know, such as Quad9. Let me roll through this slide though, because of course I've just described what we use for something we haven't explained yet. So DNS filtering is really just a layer of service that makes sure that your end users don't mistakenly activate a command and control command, hit a CNC server that activates an attack on a machine simply by either typoing a name. A lot of typo squatters out there will launch attacks or even launch resident malware just waiting for that typo squat. They will also block a constantly updated list of known CNC and other malware sites, known bad actors out there. So it's a wonderful extra layer. Typo attacks or typo squatting attacks. And of course, now you can get solutions from both Cisco/OpenDNS and from DNS Filter that can be dropped on mobile clients so that these rules apply even if they're getting their DNS resolution elsewhere. They're outside your network while they're on the move. All right, so the next thing is email filtering. And another thing where we'd like to say this goes without saying, We were at one time a big proponent of on-site solutions, again with us through SonicWall, but of course players like Barracuda and many others are out there. Over time, we've decided, I have decided that we're much happier with hosted solutions that happen upstream of the email server, whether or not that's on-premise. For 2/3 of the sites, there's no premise mail servers anymore. The biggest sites still do it. It's great to have it hosted for a lot of reasons. They can provide continuity. They can prevent any mail flow from ever actually coming into the site. For some people with limited bandwidth, that's helpful. But for me, the biggest issue is we no longer have to have an SMTP port open to the world on site. So if you do have premise mail servers, it's wonderful to be able to lock the mail flow down to just a single source. One thing to watch out for when you go with your mail filtering solution is what many people call perimeter nuking. Lots of mail filtering solutions, they cheat a little bit. They'll go to the blacklists, and if they see any mail sent from a blacklisted server, I think there's about, I don't know, 110 blacklist sources, they'll say, oh, we're going to just drop that right at the perimeter. We're not even going to look at that mail. We're just going to assume it's bad. The problem is, as many of you have experienced, it's not impossible to be erroneously listed as a blacklisted mail center. If you deal with anybody who's under regulatory compliance or law firms, which are both actually, so FINRA, HIPAA, or law firms, you'll find that there are certain mail messages that can't get dropped no matter what. Law firms, they're docketing messages and others. And if you can't roll back through logs and find a blocked message, which you can't if they've been perimeter nuked, that's a big deal. So you have to watch out for that. It's also nice if your mail filtering solution is part of a larger ecosystem. So for example, you can add on encryption, archiving, or various other services. In our case, we use Mail Protector. We made that transition a year and a half, 2 years ago. I'm extremely happy with the capabilities and the way they deliver their service and the end user friendliness. So we'll move on to power protection, which very few people think of as part of security. But the reality is it's a very important part of protecting data and OS. If you don't have power protection and you don't have it set up right, and a server crashes on you, you can have a real problem. If you're smart and you have image-based backup, you can recover quickly, but no recovery is better than any quick recovery. That is, not having to recover. Power control is network control. You have to protect your power control, make sure it's secure. Whoever owns the on-off switch owns your network. This has to be done right, and there's a lot of small details that we learned the hard way. Just for one quick scenario, years ago we had a site. APC is our preferred power protection partner. We had it well protected. They had an outage, and it lasted roughly 20 minutes. It drew down most of the capability of the UPS, but power came back on, and then 3 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes later, it went out, but this time there wasn't nearly enough power in the server to shut down the SPS server, and it blew that server to smithereens. It's actually the last serious disaster we've had. It was 1999, and it was the day before Thanksgiving. It was before imaging, and we were there for, well, we being me, were there for 2 days over Thanksgiving rebuilding that server. What we learned is that when you configure the parameters in power management, you have to consider a bad scenario like I just described. Don't let those UPSs drain to the point where if they shut down, come back up, and then power drops again, that they don't have adequate support for the OS. So in other words, set them up to shut down in 5 minutes, make sure that it preserves your battery. It's not impossible that power will go up and down 4 times. You can still get beaten, but you're better prepared. And over provision. If you need 1,000 voltamps of protection, sell 1,500. It's better to be better prepared than less. So I'm going to talk about another area that we call total data protection, which has been somewhat co-opted by Datto, which is okay with us since we're Datto partners, but it refers to a complete backup business continuity and disaster recovery plan or provisioning. We do that for all of our sites. Amazingly enough, right down to a 4-user site, we have a Datto Cirrus device everywhere. It's part of their security planning. If you can't recover your data, then you don't have a security plan. And of course, there are times when all you have is this. If somebody gets encrypted by ransomware despite all of your other best efforts. It's wonderful to spend as much time as you want trying to decrypt it, but the reality is you're probably going to fall back on recent backups. For us, at least during working hours, every site gets a snapshot done every hour. There's no way we're going to leave home without it. The other thing about this, and we'll kind of touch on that comment about Windows 10 patching failures in general, one of the reasons we can be a little bolder about patching is that we have an hourly backup, and our patching is set to happen 15 minutes after a backup at every site. So that snapshot means that if we blow something to smithereens with a patch, we can roll back. We might not know immediately. It might be that it patches at 2:15 a.m., but we know at 8 o'clock when they open up that we can roll back to the 2 a.m. patch. Having a device that works, that provides such a profound safety net under you, makes it a lot safer for us, a lot easier for us to be aggressive or somewhat more aggressive than patching. All right, Harry, you're getting closer to the end of this long section. I'm going to touch on securing Wi-Fi access. And this is, at this level, kind of simple. We segment traffic by SSID and VLAN. We make sure that nobody ever uses the same SSID to provide internet access or guest access as they use to access the inside of their network. Any modern firewall or managed Wi-Fi solution, from Ubiquiti to Datto for that matter, OpenMesh to Ruckus and everybody else, allows you to do this, even integrated wireless with Sophos, Fortinet, SonicWall, etc. Make sure at the very least you segment them out. The next step is to stay current. If you guys dig into your WPA2 settings, you'll find that there are various options, some more secure than others. You have to choose AES over TKIP. I don't want to get into an argument about that. That is one of those old bench racer arguments where nobody's right, but everybody's sure. Stay current, make sure that you set these up as securely as you can and set up a really secure WPA2 passphrase. I mentioned WPA3 because it was just very recently, I guess it's been ratified, it's now a standard and they're looking at rolling it out by the end of the year. We don't yet know if that's going to be backwards compatible with any WPA2 equipment and just a firmware update, or it's going to require new equipment. It would very likely require new endpoints, so I don't think we're going to see a lot of this year or maybe even next, but it really needs to happen, and it's a huge leap over WPA2, which even quite recently has been shown to be a lot weaker than we thought and easily hacked. So the last step here, this is a little bit of a wish list item for a lot of folks, but wireless monitoring tools are a godsend. Air Magnets, Mobile Iron, I believe, also does this, many others. There are tools out there that allow you to look for everything from persistent attacks to rogue access points. And a lot of the equipment nowadays, in particular SonicWall stuff, will allow you to look for and shut down rogue APs. These are great things to do. Learn your tools, try to expand them, and deploy them. So we're right at the 50% point, maybe 52%, and I'm going to turn this over to you, Harry.
Absolutely. So folks, again, it's because of the generosity of our sponsors like the RMM group at SolarWinds that we're on the air. And everybody on this call can appreciate we all have business models, we all have expenses, and we have income. So thank you, SolarWinds, for your support. Thank you for those of you that took time out of your day to participate in this. And Jenny, I believe we're going to roll a video.
Hello everyone, welcome to our first release video for N-Central, filmed right here in Ottawa in front of our beloved Parliament buildings. You should come visit sometime, but not in the winter, it's really too cold here. I'm Omar Cahill, Product Marketing Manager for N-Central, and with me is Chris Reed, Product Manager for N-Central. And we're here to tell you about how you can see more, know more, and do more with both N-Central 11.2 and 12.0. Let's start with how you can see more. Take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Omar. How many times have you had one of your end users call you and say, I can't access Office 365, or when I go to this website, it seems really slow? NetPath is a great way to understand where that problem may be occurring. Is it, for example, a problem with the local LAN that the customer's in, or is it a problem with a hop or a node somewhere along the way out in the public infrastructure? NetPath lets you understand where the problem may lie, and even better if it's a public node, tells you who owns it and how to contact them. NetPath lets you map from any source server or workstation that you manage by showing you the path it would take to reach any destination IP address or hostname. The primary use case here is to map your customers' connectivity to popular cloud applications such as Office 365, G Suite, Amazon Web Services, or any networked application that's part of their business. NetPath reveals each hop, node, and link it would take for you to reach the destination, making it easy to troubleshoot hotspots or bottlenecks throughout the whole path. Not only can you see within your own network, but the ISP and cloud provider's infrastructure will be displayed to you within the NetPath window. When a problem does occur, NetPath gives you the contact email address and phone number for wherever the problem is occurring, so that you can more easily reach out to whoever owns that infrastructure and help them troubleshoot the problem. I can keep going, but check it out for yourself in the N-central UI under the View NetPath menu. Click to add a path by selecting a server or workstation, typing in a destination, and within a few minutes, you'll have a path monitored within N-central. The data is stored historically for 30 days, so you can even go back in time to troubleshoot any issues. Get started now by upgrading your N-central server to version 12.0. Once the upgrade is complete, you'll have 5 free paths to use for 30 days. Give it a try today. We left some common URLs in the description below.
We have a poll question. Jenny, if you could bring up the poll question from SolarWinds. And the question is, are you interested in getting pricing or more information about SolarWinds MSP RMM? Folks, while you're answering that, it's a simple yes or no. I do want to encourage you to consider the SolarWinds Empower conference, essentially, I was going to say mid-September, but it's the 18th, 19th, just after mid-September in Scottsdale, Arizona at the JW Marriott. Very nice. So please, SolarWinds Empower 2018, if you want to search on that. Jenny, we probably have allowed people to do the yes, no, if we want to take it back to Joshua.
Hey, Harry.
And there we are. Okay. Hey, Joshua, got a couple comments, a couple questions, if you don't mind.
I don't, but let me run down one thing real quick. I stepped off camera mostly, and
Okay.
I guess when I did, it became clear that there's a world map behind me, which you can see shows all of our locations worldwide with a red pen. I'm a big travel fan. I traveled all over, and I have that up there because every once in a while when I'm struggling with somebody who doesn't think what we do is important, it helps me to remember it's a bigger world. There's also a photo of one of my huskies and a drawing someone made for me of a large dog I had once, because I'm a husky and a dog guy. Just that
There you
explains
go.
that. Go ahead, Harry.
Okay, so a couple of comments. William Prush talks about GoDaddy filtering emails for no apparent reason. I have a strong relationship with GoDaddy, so Warren Prush, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, with your permission, pass on your comments to a product manager at GoDaddy and get you a private reply. David Ham goes on to say, hey, David, he says, regarding the shift to heuristics capable malware protective solutions such as CLANS and Carbon Black, are you adding these to traditional signature-based solutions or supplementing them?
Well, we're neither adding nor supplementing, we're replacing them. So they are running in place of existing anti-malware.
Okay, and David goes on to say, are the traditional providers such as Trend Micro, Symantec, etc., including comparable heuristics, I don't say that word every day, capabilities in their solutions or have them on their roadmap? Don't know if you would know that. Do you know if Trend and Symantec are going there?
Well, I do know that for many years, Symantec had heuristic capabilities as part of their feature set. It was pretty limited compared to what's out there right now. These new next-gen answers are a big leap forward. But yes, without committing to details, I can't share. Almost all the vendors that I can think of are moving in this direction. I think their intention is to share, to do both signature and heuristic or behavioral. It's not really quite the same thing, but for the most part, yes, they're moving in that direction. It's definitely the future of AV.
Okay, and then two more comments quickly, because I know we have so much to cover, man. We're at 12:48 p.m. in Seattle. Great idea to patch after the backup. Thanks for the idea. That's Ed Carnes, longtime community member, Ed Carnes out of Tennessee. Finally, Scott Jensen says, I'm currently using SolarWinds MSP. Will they be providing a behavior scanning product? Scott, I'll connect you with a product manager over at SolarWinds. Why don't we handle it that way? Joshua, let's get back to the good stuff.
All right, we're near the end of the basics. The next step would be the securing of remote access. So many of us at this point, well, I'm going to assume all of us understand that we really shouldn't be considering access into these networks anyway, but secured through SSL VPN or VPN. There are a lot of people still using IPsec VPN. I can't see any advantage to that. I certainly don't see performance or stability advantages, and I certainly don't see security advantages. So we've moved many years ago all to SSL VPN. In an ideal situation, those accesses are logged, and it's something we can roll back for. And in some regulatory environments, they simply have to be. That's a bigger discussion too. I do want to kind of touch on that offline if somebody wants to go further, but that's the ideal way. Let's try to roll this the same way again. There we go. So the next step is OTP, or what I call poor man's TFA. So one-time passwords are a type of two-factor authentication. They're built in, their capabilities are built in and freely accessible through SonicWall products, and for what I understand, Fortinet, Sophos, and others. All it means is that there's a third factor besides the username and password required to access the network, and that's a one-time password that's typically sent as an MMS or email message and delivered by a phone for the most part, or of course a tablet or notebook if it's connected. And that way the user who connects into the network has to provide another form of authentication besides just the username and password. Besides the obvious layer of protection, it's really a nifty capability for a customer to turn on if, for example, they had a bad separation, somebody who leaves, especially an IT type person, and they know a lot of people's credentials. With anybody's credentials, they can get in to that network by SSL VPN. But not if you have TFA and one-time passwords turned on, because presumably, of course, you will have defeated the delivery of that OTP to that separated employee's device. So it locks out people a little more effectively. It's important, sorry, I went ahead of myself a little. It's important to note that the third-party TFA solutions and folks like Duo, who was very recently about to become part of Cisco, those guys allow you to do this in a much more elegant fashion with a lot more control and a lot more transparency. The users have to do nothing but press a button on a text message or an email or a phone screen to push that TFA, that third factor, through and get logged in. There are other companies out there that do it only through web browsers and more other options, but OTP is very sophisticated, far more than the freebie built into your firewall. And here's kind of a nice little thing. I do this all the time, and for years I've done it and didn't realize that it was not common practice. When I get on an open wireless access point anywhere, I fire up my SSL VPN client and connect back to the office. So that tunnels the traffic through my office and out through our access. Depending on the nature of the connection you're on, there's little to no performance hit, unless you happen to be somewhere with a higher uphill speed than you have through your office. But back here we have 25 meg up, and for the most part I don't have any more than that in the field. So we tunnel traffic back through, and that means that A, my traffic's encrypted, and B, it's being scanned as it goes through. So it's way better than using an open access point, which we just never do. And keep in mind, if you bury credentials in your browser or a third-party manager, you should do this before you go to Amazon, Southwest, Marriott, or whatever you're doing, because you're moving credentials. Even if SSL encrypted, you're moving it through an open access. Go ahead and tunnel your traffic back. Teach your customers to use this too. Sorry, Harry.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because the temptation's always there for the hotel, the open. Trying to see if I'm echo, but Joshua, the point is, NordVPN is doing a lot of TV advertisements addressing exactly this. That's my point. Please continue.
Yeah, and that's an answer for folks who don't have the luxury of an office to terminate a VPN connection to. Another interesting detail is that there's a brand new release of the SonicWall SL VPN client and devices, and they have something called Always On VPN, I believe, which basically means the moment you fire that connection up, you're going to enable your SSL VPN connection. It automates the process for you. So that's kind of nifty. We haven't yet deployed it. I believe that was released Friday. All right, I'll try to roll forward if I can figure it out. There we go. So now we're on to mobile device management. Once again, we'd love to have this everywhere. We have virtually nobody doing this. It's really important. It's hard to impress enough upon clients how important this is. But the first step of any MDM management solution is to have a policy. When our customers ask us about this, the very first thing you have to do is create a BYOD policy. If you're going to allow people to bring their own devices, bring your own device, you're going to have a policy. For example, if you have an end user, if your client has a staff member who uses their own phone and they go out and lose it, and you remote wipe it for them, and 2 hours later they find it in the trunk of their car and discover that their family photos for the last 1,675 years, because they were, born a long time ago. Anyway, they've lost all their photos, they've never backed them up, and you're in trouble. There are actually lawsuits out there where staff has successfully sued their employers for losing personal data on a phone they used for work. Create a policy, learn how to do it. Now, MDM tools can do pretty nifty things like partitioning a phone to allow you to do a partial or a selective wipe, which means that in the same situation, you could wipe the company partition of that phone, and then when they find their phone 2 hours later, they'll still have access to their personal stuff. This is not as simple as it's supposed to be. Hang on. All right, now it's working. So another nifty thing about MDM tools is that they allow you to geo-track and ring-fence devices. You can actually tell where somebody is, which for a lot of employers is important, and you can limit access to corporate objects from the phone, and you can also disable the phone based on geographic or ring-fenced areas. It's kind of nifty. It's a little hard to explain quickly, but these are capabilities built into some of the better MDM tools. Mobile Iron comes to mind. We're experimenting with Mass 360 right now, which also does all of this and more, as well as providing some basic anti-malware on the devices. All right, now we're going to dive into encryption options. In my opinion, one of the stupidest decisions Microsoft made in Windows 7 days was to limit the access to BitLocker to Windows 7 Enterprise, which basically meant none of our customers had access to it. Nowadays, fortunately, Windows 10 Pro and up have integrated BitLocker. We absolutely use it on every mobile device, on every laptop or notebook machine. We set one up, we encrypt it. We don't even ask anymore. It's just done. As you probably know, once you encrypt the device, what you're protecting against is the removal of the data storage from that, the NVMe or SSD or spinning hard drive, and the placement into a secondary machine to gain access to it if you don't have a password or access to it otherwise. When you lock something in BitLocker and you lock it down to the TPM chip or with the newest versions to just a generated key, you can no longer grab that data storage device out of the portable, throw it somewhere else and read it. In addition to being obviously important in terms of security, it can be a real face saver in terms of a data breach or loss. So in many states, if you lose a device, even with PII or healthcare information on it, if that device is encrypted, unless there's reason to believe the encryption key has been ascertained as well, or lost as well, you don't have to report that as a breach or as a lost device. And that's a pretty big deal for folks. I mentioned key management and better options. I just want to mention in passing that there are frameworks or overall encryption management solutions from folks like Sophos, Symantec, and others that allow you to do key escrow or key management. The key is what decrypts your machine. If you have a machine that fails and you replace the motherboard, you'll find you no longer have access to the data on that encrypted drive unless you provide a key. Well, where's that key? It's generated during the encryption process with BitLocker and other solutions, but you have to manage it. And there's a lot of ways that you can get into trouble and make mistakes. So there are frameworks or products that you can buy or services you can buy as SaaS that allow you to manage your encryption. Oh, okay, so we're in part 3. The good news is these are smaller sections because we don't do these everywhere. So now we're moving into full-blown two-factor authentication. There's all kinds of solutions for TFA. And again, two-factor applies to, and I'm sorry, that should say multi-factor, not TFA, multi-factor authentication. This applies to anytime you provide more than a username and a password. So biometrics count here. Token keys that you can carry around on you on a little crypto key that you might get from E-Trade or from any other third party that offers these. They are something you know, which are your credentials, and in combination with something that you are, if it's biometrics, or something that you have, if it's a token key or a one-time password. Point here is that OTP is a great solution for everyone. For remote users, we absolutely enforce it. But you can have it enforced for every user everywhere very simply. And these prices have come down to the point where your cost can be around $3 a user a month. That's the kind of thing you can roll into a full managed services plan or bundle into an add-on, an enhanced security suite or whatever you like to call it. Biometrics and key fob options or crypto keys, as I mentioned. And another nifty point here, and I think I brought it up earlier, is that TFA allows really effective lockout. Again, if you lose somebody, especially in a less than optimal manner, if one of your clients loses a staff member, employee, it's a wonderful way to effectively lock them out. All right, so now I got my roll forward issue. Here we go. So internal vulnerability scans. We did talk about this in the basics. This is a little more about it because with the right services and devices, you can get missing and failed patch reporting. And what we didn't mention earlier, and this is really big for me, is new device notification. We did mention using MAC lockouts so people can't throw a device on the network. Excuse me. That's my first time on a webinar sneezing. So we did mention, yeah, that was a good one. Huh? So I got this just in case. So new device notification is a wonderful thing to have, and these devices, IBS and other services can provide you notification of the addition of a device in your network, whether or not it's DHCP acquired addresses, and that can really save your ass. There's just so many times when people throw things on networks without thinking about it because they figure it's your problem, you being the MSP. This is going to be greatly amplified by IoT products. By the way, when we have a site that relies on a lot of IoT, we typically build a whole separate VLAN for those alone to the extent that we can, and we isolate those as much as humanly possible. IoT is the whole brand new next generation of real problems. IoT is remote access or wireless for the next 2 decades. And it's as wonderful as it is for our end users, it's a real nightmare for us. So having notification of a new device IP is a wonderful thing. All right, so now we'll jump to the external vulnerability scans. These can be delivered by devices or services or a combination actually. And in some cases, they're mandated. You simply can't get away without having a scan in the HIPAA or I believe FINRA world. We don't have a FINRA covered entity, but you do have to have these scans done for a lot of compliance reasons. They're not the same thing as pen tests, and I just want to spend a moment describing the difference. So external vulnerability scans basically are limited to looking for clear entries, open ports, and other configuration errors. There's so much checking your work, basically. Pen tests are the attempt to use those vulnerabilities and actually enter the network. They're quite a bit more complicated, which you can interpret as expensive to get executed properly. But it's very important that you realize that in any of these cases, you want a third party involved doing this. You don't want to check your own work. You don't want, NetSciences is not going to be able to certify that a NetSciences network has been scanned for vulnerabilities. We want a third party involved. There's a lot of players in this field. Some of them are the same folks that do firewall or router, switch, and server log reading. Some of the names out there, Soter, S-O-T-E-R, Vigilan, and others are in this group. Learn about them, work with them. Some of them are priced so well you can't believe it. We're talking sub $100 a month and even less. So that kind of segues into the next level of this, and that's watching over you, we call it, or SOCs, Security Operations Centers. Another way you'll hear that described as SIEM, S-I-E-M, Security Information and Event Management. These are outside organizations that read logs at the very least, and in some cases also provide response and remediation. Now, responses are typically alerts, but depending on the player that you're working with, it can be more than simple alerts. You can actually empower them to do things like block IP ranges. Of course, you have to provide them firewall access to do this, but they can block if they find an advanced persistent threat in process or in progress. They can actually block the IP range it's coming from and more. Most of the time, we get remediation advice from these guys, which is what you get after your vulnerability or pen test scans. But there are definitely response services as well. The big news here is just that somebody's got your back 24/7. The bottom line is it's not just you, and hardly any of us run MSPs large enough to have a truly effective security operations center. For those of you that do, my hat is off to you. That is a very difficult thing to do well and very risky. So having someone out there watching your back and doing your 24/7 log reading is fabulous. We are trying to get to the point where every site has firewall logs read, and eventually I'd like to have their DC logs read as well. We're still in process. Go ahead, Eric.
Good. That's really cool. We're on video. I'm getting a little echo. Joshua, do you hear the echo reverb, or is it my voice clear?
It's clear here. I'm not hearing anything like that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's catch up on a couple of questions or comments here. We have Daryl Roberts asking, and this goes back a couple slides. Forgive me, Daryl. Have you looked at Duo TFA? We were before Cisco bought them. Duo TFA.
Yes, I think I mentioned it by name. We were in the process of coming on with them when I read about the Cisco acquisition. I'm holding fire on that. We haven't had the best experiences with companies that were acquired by Cisco, and I don't really want to denigrate anybody on this call. I'm just a little wary of it, and I want to do a little more due diligence before we execute. I was exposed to another vendor at the CompTIA show that goes by the odd name Inwebo, I-N-W-E-B-O, who purports to do very similar TFA things to what Duo offers. I don't know much about them other than what I gleaned at the time. I haven't been able to follow up with them since in the past week. And there are other players as well. There was a big player in our market. Harry, you probably remember Dana F. with
yeah.
I believe it was Kaseya that bought his company.
Scorpion, yeah.
Yeah. Now, as best I know, that's still another player in the marketplace, and they were the first TFA products we ever used. I think I still have at least one or two Auth keys in my possession. There are many players. Yes, Duo was impressive. I found that their 3-level pricing and feature set scheme was a little bit convoluted. It wasn't that I couldn't understand it, but it's pretty hard to sell something complicated to a customer. If you've heard that phrase, there are no confused buyers. I strongly agree. But Duo is a great choice. Go ahead, Harry. Next.
Okay. Hey, sanity check, 23 minutes left. We have Warren Brush asking, have you enabled biometrics? How do you get the RMM to access the workstation for maintenance? So biometrics.
So the only places we're using biometrics are on portables, and they're the integrated fingerprint readers. And that's a really good question, by the way. I hadn't even considered myself. We're not yet using biometrics. It's funny, I always explain to people that biometrics are great if you're in situ, if you're at your desktop or on your laptop. but when you need remote access, it makes no sense. And of course, RMM by definition is remote access. I don't have a good answer to that, Harry. I'm going to kick that back to you and have you kick it to the folks at SolarWinds, either through SolarWinds MSP or Enable, and see what they have to say about that. What's up? Is that it?
Yep, that's it for now.
Okay. You might ask a poll question about that echo, if they're hearing echo out there, and we'll come right back to that in a slide or two. So now we're finishing up towards the end of intermediate security. Dark web scanning services are pretty much all the rage right now. You see them everywhere. ID Agent was the leader in our field pushing these. There's a lot of wow factor these. I've almost never seen anybody not find at least some of their credentials on the dark web through these tools. Frequently, they're abandoned or older credentials, but nonetheless, they're out there. You have to be careful not to overpromise here. You can certainly show your customers or your prospects that these are out there, but you can't promise that they won't be out there again in 6 months or a year. You don't control the behavior of your clientele. You do the best you can, but you don't control it. You also find that a lot of these services are becoming bundled with the external vulnerability scanning services, where you get a certain number of dark web scans. There's really only 2 or 3 major players here, and you'll find that they're becoming bundled. They're very, very quickly being picked up by others right now. Can't remember, I don't remember if it was Symantec or Lifeguard, or one of the folks that offer identity protection are now offering this too. So they're moving outside of the IT field as well. They're a great prospecting tool, but again, don't overpromise. So now we're talking about other endpoints, and we're touching IoT. But remember, there's HVAC systems on some of your networks. There's cameras. There might be freezers, refrigerators, and other third-party devices like that. We build a dedicated VLAN for our IoT devices, and I'm going to refer to HVAC, cameras, security of any sort, physical security, which we'll touch on a bit more, as IoT. We dedicate a VLAN to them to get started, and we are in the midst of looking into emerging IoT security products. I think that's going to be a big field. You may or may not know that IoT products have already been hacked and used very aggressively, primarily for distributed denial of service attacks against folks like Ryan Krebs and other security bloggers. The problem that we face as a community of IT guys is that lots of IoT stuff is built not only poorly and insecurely, but inherently insecurable in the sense that they can't be patched. So once those security holes are found, there's no way to fix them. And to further exacerbate that problem, a lot of these IoT devices are embedded in devices, IoT products are embedded in devices that aren't going to be replaced in a decade. They're in refrigerators, and they're in thermostats, and there are various things that people simply aren't going to replace. So you have an inherently insecure, unpatchable device that's not going anywhere. You can imagine that's not a great situation. So I think that IoT security is a great place for brilliant young people who know how to code and understand security to make their fortune. We're out there looking for products, and if anybody wants to follow up with me after this, because they know stuff I don't know about it, I'd love to hear about it. And this is a good segue into the physical and video security. So there's some easy stuff we do. Earlier I mentioned locking down your DHCP server to known MAC addresses. The physical analog to that is putting your stuff in locked enclosures. We have sites with as few as 4 users. One site that's got a 1U server and a locked 18U, I believe, trip-light enclosure. Anything we do that touches anything that's even slightly HIPAA related, we make sure that they have locked enclosures. It's a little tiny thing, but if you put everything inside of a locked enclosure, lag it down to the ground, that includes physical access to the switches, by the way. Just feed the cables through the enclosure, lock it up, lag it in place. That's a big step. So the harder stuff is things like detection and surveillance. So cameras, anything that's related to anything that's related to IP security. We've recently started working with Axis, AXIS, for cameras. I love the products and the depth of their product line. Support's good, all this, very happy with it. But learning to be a camera guy is not the same thing as learning to be an IT security guy. There's a lot more things, there's a lot of details to consider, whether it's camera placement and incident angle or light or surveillance schedules or any number of other things. There's a lot to learn. Don't step lightly into it. It turns out that many states also require you, I got you right, require you to have a low voltage license, even just to hang these cameras. So you might end up find out that you're gonna partner with your wiring guys to do this, unless you are wiring guys. The last thing I'm going to touch on and come back to you, Harry, is tracking access. Okay. That's going to be a little more in the next slide, but I'm talking about physical access control, which, by the way, can be integrated into camera and surveillance systems. So what's up, Harry?
Yeah, just on the camera thing, I wanted to give a shout out in a couple of lectures. I believe it's September 12th. We have the Cannabis Technology Tech Talk lecture, and Joshua, once everybody gets past the high school jokes, this is a legitimate, real industry. They have cash, they pay their bills. Join us for the lecture. There's a lot of context, but specific to the cameras and the surveillance, you have compliance. You have compliance issues, right? That these dispensaries have to have camera. Guys, this is serious stuff, man. That's all. I just wanted to make a point.
The cash aspect of that is interesting, and I think a lot of folks on the line, especially if they're Canadian, aren't aware of the fact that in the United States, since marijuana is federally illegal, but legal in some states, the problem is you can't use the banking system as a cannabis purveyor. And I don't know nearly as much as people will come on, but I can say that a cash-only business invites things that surveillance and cameras were designed to manage. One last little detail about the cameras is that anybody who does HIPAA has a HIPAA portfolio or HIPAA covered entities in their portfolio understands that none of us can certify that somebody's HIPAA compliant. There's no such thing. It's like certifying that your IRS return is perfect. Nobody can do that. So all we can do is perform all the diligence possible. And I have found that one of the nice little benefits of having video surveillance is that it's just yet another example or another way to demonstrate that you've taken your security seriously, and I'm sure this applies to FINRA as well, and that you do such things as surveil physical access to the server stack or anything with PII data. All right, so here it is. Physical access control, not a traditionally SMB thing. We actually do have one site that does this. Because you integrate these with video security devices, and that's a longer discussion than we can have here, it's related to our previous discussion. There are key cards, biometrics, and visual methods to gain access to controlled areas. By visual, I mean somebody sees you and says, yeah, you can come in. But key cards are used commonly. There is a real strong overlap between IT and physical security, which is interesting because more than 25 years ago in the DOE, this is what I was, as we began to have IT security, or at least internet security and physical security come together, that's what I did way back when. The interesting thing here is that as they overlap into the IT field, you have things like key cards, which can not only get you into places, but there are proximity cards where if you move a certain feet or meters from a receiver on a PC, you get logged out. You'll see that in hospitals or defense installations. I think in trading installations as well, FINRA traders. So I'm sorry, trading installations. This is pretty neat stuff. It's pretty niche. It's at the edge of SMB, but it's out there and happening. So we're almost to the finish line. We have 2 sections left, each shorter than the next or the previous. So now we're talking about advanced topics that a lot of us won't get to touch in SMBs, but I'm going to sprint through them. Data lifecycle management is not just about, in the old days, retiring or moving data from disk to optical to tape and having 3 tiers of access. If there's anybody nearly so old as I am doing this on this call, you know that that was something we used to deal with. Nowadays, data lifecycle management frequently is a security concern. You want to reduce your data attack surface. In other words, if there's data out there you don't need to keep live and accessible, don't keep it live and accessible. retire it or at least archive it in the literal sense of the word, move it to other media and keep it offline. You're pruning and restricting data access that way, and you're providing less exposure should there be a breach. And then there's data on mobile devices. We did talk about MDM. This is a real tough thing to control. It's all but impossible to keep people from creating data on notebooks that don't come back to the office. But of course, that's amplified all the more by tablets and phones. Fortunately, most people only consume data on tablets and phones, but that's changing too. This is all part of that data lifecycle management discussion. And now we're into identity and access management, where you actually provide identity proof by means of TFA or MFA and other methodologies. Again, this is really not an SMB concern yet, but it's out there and it's starting to happen. We're investigating that for clientele. We don't have it at play anywhere yet, but this is moving into the SMB space. It's something that's been a mid-sized enterprise capability for several years already. Data leakage prevention. It might be wrong to place this in advance. There are a lot of ways that we can do this even on an SMB budget. There's two different vectors that we talk about for the most part with DLP, but email and physical devices are those vectors. And people still have devices, Barracuda, SonicWall, et cetera, on site. There are ways to set up rules to prevent the transmission through email of sensitive data types such as such as social security numbers or other restricted information that can be recognized by its data format. These devices can prevent that leakage of data or services nowadays, not just devices. And that's something that we have in the past deployed in SMB spaces. And then of course, device controls. I remember the day when the Semantic Enterprise and Point Security products provided this. This is a way to lock down USB ports on your desktops or other devices, laptops if you choose, so that people can't plug in a portable drive and walk out the door with 2 terabytes of data, you know, in this at the size of a fingernail. It's really, really hard to control this, but these controls are built into various products now. There's some fine details here because, of course, a lot of us boot to USB keyboards and mice. Well, those are accessible, but based on the descriptor that's used inside the registry to find the devices, you can lock out some devices but allow others. This is basically a framework that sits on top of a system to manage and control these devices. And if there's any hardcore IT folks out there, you probably know that you can do a lot of this with custom coding, scripts, registry editing. This is just a way to put a pretty face on this to make it manageable and simple for people now more at my level. All right, so application whitelisting. This is pretty much the holy grail of control. I don't know that this is the future for us, but years ago, this was already mooted as the only way we're ever going to be secure. We're going to build whitelists of accepted applications and block everything else. I don't know that that's really going to happen. There's a lot of details. There's everything from what happens when you patch something to update or in any other way add an app or change an app that's in use. There's not any product I've seen yet in the SMB space that can scan and compile a list of accepted whitelisted applications. And without that automated step, this is overwhelmingly difficult to do. But it's out there. It may be our future. I haven't seen enough of it yet to say. We're in the final phase here. Have any questions?
Yeah, Joshua, a comment on that last slide is that basically application control. To me, that was always the argument for the Citrix type virtual desktops, VDI, bunch of solutions out there, but that was the whole idea that you could lock down, you know, hey, you come to work at SMB Nation, you're only going to use 3 applications, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to have a Citrix session or a remote desktop protocol session. That's it. If you don't agree, Joshua, you don't work for SMB Nation.
Okay. So that is true, and that is a subset, I would say. Well, it's not quite the same thing. If folks out there that handle Citrix delivery of, or any solution that uses published applications, or for that matter, VDI solutions, you understand that you can lock folks down to running just those apps. That's a little bit more draconian than just whitelisting, but it does imply that you have an infrastructure to support that in place. Whitelisting is the kind of thing you can drop in place on top of a more ordinary network, I'll call it. But you're right, published applications controlled by RDP/Citrix or other such solutions are the extreme of that. All right,
Okay.
you put it that way. So now we're just going to talk quickly about staying secure. This is somewhat less technical, more focused on personnel, but very often overlooked. So here's some, I'd say, 3 security documents that I consider must-haves. Acceptable usage policies. Everybody has to have this. You can find them all over the place. Ours is 1 page long, except for rare exceptions where we have a client that wants to be more liberal and allow for more usage. They're occasionally 2 pages. They've got to be in place. The number of times folks have asked me, can I fire somebody for doing XXX? And my question is, do they know they can't? No, they don't, if you don't have a signed acceptable usage policy. The next thing is an incident response plan. We have a generic one that I think is 5 to 6 pages long, and then we can build them to be tailored them more specifically to given sites. But this is, what is an incident, what's a response, and what's your plan? I'm not going to go more deeply into that, but it's a big deal, and you have to have, the bottom line is things will happen, and you have to have a plan in place. And finally, disaster recovery plans, which are kind of the granddaddy of IRP. They're bigger. They cover more than just incidents. They cover disasters. In our case, again, we have a genericized, maybe 6 or 8 page document. DR plans have to do 3 things. They have to define what constitutes a disaster. In our case, we use level 1, 2, or 3. Level 1 being the loss of something like a server, short term. Level 2 being a more complete loss or a longer term loss, and level 3 being an actual site-wide disaster. We don't go to level 4. I don't have anything in mind for the recovery from a large meteor strike. People always ask. No, we don't have that. But DR plans also have to have rally points and access, phone numbers and access to who does what, even an org chart, so we know who you reach to do what, and a list of critical personnel. And they have to have a response location. Where do you go? What do you do? Do you rent a cold spare office? How do you access your data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? These are the 3 basic documents everybody should have. If they're on a top level managed services plan from us, they get them. If they're not, they pay for them. So, security training for your staff. We all know this has to happen. Hardly anybody really does it. But the staff are your gatekeepers. You need frequent training for all of them. And I don't mean annual or semi or even quarterly. We work with KnowBe4. There are other players like Secure Now and others that provide, Atata, I think is another one, that provide online training delivered through videos or simulations or animations to teach your staff and your client staff how to be more resistant to phishing and other, for the most part, social engineering attacks, and how to recognize bogus communications and how to resist everything from phishing delivered ransomware to the CEO wire transfer scams. This kind of stuff should be delivered monthly and tested and reported. One of the nice things about these services is you get phishing, pseudo phishing attacks. If people fall for them, you get to look at who's not learning and how to address them. That's huge, and we urge everybody to work with that. That's in all of our plans, by the way. Then there's strategic IT planning, which is a security issue. We need to have scheduled meetings. We need to treat security as job one, and we need to train people to understand that just because they can bring in, fill in the blank, their home router and just plug it into the network, doesn't mean they should. Just because they can still run a 12-year-old machine doesn't mean they can. I think I just lost you there. There we go. Have you got the screen, Harry? Okay. So we're into the last of this. These are compliance issues. This is not about compliance. As a matter of fact, that would be a longer presentation, and that would have to be compliance specific. All I want to say is that any kind of compliance, HIPAA, FINRA, SOX, the list goes on, you really have to plan, execute, and document. That's what compliance comes down to. Very few compliance regimens are prescriptive. Even HIPAA doesn't say, for example, I don't believe it ever says you have to have a firewall. It says you have to do things that a firewall is necessary to do, but it's more about planning, execution, and documenting of processes, procedures, training, and execution. So I'm going to close on this slide. Zen and the art of security. There's always going to be more to do. I mean, we went through basically 32 different options here. There are plenty of things I'm sure I'll hear from people we didn't cover. There's always more. You'll never get perfect. The point is that if you train your users, or your clients train their end users, and you train your clients, and you plan, and you find the right suite of tools, and you execute, you're going to stay ahead of the bear. And I mean that most hacking is still opportunistic, with the exception of targeted attacks. Most hacking is opportunistic. And if you're not easy, they're going to move on. Anyway, that's how you'll want to close this out. There's some contact information that's pretty straightforward there. If anybody wants to follow up directly or through you, I'm sure, Harry, they can reach out to us as well. I think we have a minute left. Any final questions?
We have two, and I'm going to shut it down after that. We have an individual who, more of a opinion, biometrics such as fingerprint and eye scan, depend on the number of points that they scan, 4, 7, 12. Each higher number increases their accuracy. Many people have problems with the fact that Apple is only using something like 5 points, which is not very secure. That's a comment from individual. Then we have David Anderson asking a question. What is Joshua's opinion of Office 365 built-in email protection, and what about the option for O365 Advanced Threat Protection for email, the pluses and minuses? Boy, howdy, you have to go quick. We are at time.
All right, so at the basic level, I'm not impressed with what they offer, and I don't use their basic protection. Now, their advanced level is very different. And on top of that, the ability to, or the know-how to securely deliver Office 365 is a whole separate focus. There actually are resources in our community for that. And if he wants to reach out to me directly, I can provide him resources for that. There's just no way time to go through that question. But the very fastest answer is your advanced protection is interesting and capable, but requires your expertise, and you need to go out there and train yourself. There are good resources. That's it.
Right on. So we're going to go ahead and shut it down. We're exactly at time. We're at 1:30 Pacific. So Joshua, thank you. Why don't you take us out, if you don't mind sharing why you're speaking at conferences, why you're writing. Is this Joshua 2.0? If you don't mind sharing with the audience, we'll make that the final word.
There's some degree of that. I mean, everybody builds an exit strategy, an off-ramp into their career path. There's a little bit of that going on there. I think I'm finally at the point where, while I will never be expert at any one of these technologies, what I'm really more advanced at than many people I run into is finding ways to deliver 80% of the security at 20% of the cost in an understandable manner that small businesses will actually engage with. It doesn't matter what we know. If we can't engage these companies and get them to do this, we haven't done any good for them or for us. I've developed a little bit of expertise there. I've always written, so writing is very easy, and I fly a lot. It eats up a lot of time on the planes. I managed to write 2 published articles on 1 round trip to Charlotte last month. That was the first time I got that done. It's just fun. I enjoy it. It's part of the natural progression of my career as I go forward.
Cool. And so people, folks, we're going to shut it down, but just to reiterate, there's his contact information for Joshua. You'll see him at Channel Pro Boston. You're going to see him at GlueCon. You're going to see him at SolarWinds Empower. Joshua, thank you very much. Jenny, let's call it a day. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.